And then you watch the footage that they wouldn't release during the trials, and you see them getting a guided tour.
Yeah, and as it turns out, the only one who was actually plotting to overthrow the government was John Brennan.
It's just so gross that our legal system gets used against political opponents in that way, in such a devious and just a sinister way.
Joe Rogan and CIA whistleblower John Kiriakou just exposed the truth about January 6th, what the feds hid from the public in that narrative, how involved the FBI was in that story and in that entrapment scheme, and what we can learn about it now. So let's get right into it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Jim Gaffigan was talking about what they did in January 6th. I go, do you understand that there were paid people that were working for the federal government? There were employees of the federal government that were on that lawn trying to convince people to go in. And he was very incredulous. He did not believe it, and I said there are agent provocateurs that is their job to try to get you to do something illegal.
Exactly. So they can build their careers by making these arrests.
Not just that, but demonize the president, the former president, to a much larger extent. To charge him with insurrection, to say that he was plotting to overthrow the government.
Yeah, and as it turns out, the only one who was actually plotting to overthrow the government was John Brennan.
Oh man, isn't that the truth? That's pretty base, but that's true. John Brennan, one of the chief architects of Russiagate, the dual-purpose scheme, propaganda scheme by the deep state to undermine the sitting president and frame him for treason for specious reasons. And guess what? I think there are a lot of bad things about Trump, but that was a specious charge and antagonize Russia at the same time. That's exactly right. FBI informants entrap dissidents all the time. This one had the dual purpose of undermining the president and saying that there's an insurrection, leading with that insurrection narrative we couldn't stop hearing about until it became more and more apparent to people actually paying attention that the feds orchestrated this entire thing.
There was this fundamental misunderstanding of what an operations officer was supposed to do. An operations officer goes out and collects intelligence and then sends it back. And that's it. Then it's up to the analyst to decide, this is great, this is crap, this is not true, this is partially true, whatever. So he goes out there, talks to whatever low-level, terrible sources he happened to have, writes all this nonsense down, sends it back, and they're like, oh, look what Donald Trump did. He hired prostitutes to pee on Barack Obama's bed. No, he didn't. One guy made this up, and Christopher Steele wrote it and sent it back. That doesn't make it fact.
Wasn't it funded by the Hillary Clinton?
It sure was.
Yeah, the Steele dossier started off as an adversarial investigative program by the Democrats to try to undermine Trump, try to, drag him into this Russian conspiracy where he was colluding with Putin. And the deep state, the CIA and the FBI just latched onto that, took a hold of it, and it entrapped the U.S. mindset for 2 to 3 years. At least on the legacy media, all we heard was that this is, deeper than Watergate. This is the biggest political scandal in U.S. history we have on our hands, where Trump is essentially acting as a Putin collaborator within the federal government. It all turned out to be bogus and nuts, and they still had to sell this while Trump was slapping sanctions on Russia. He was complaining that Russia had given Snowden safe haven. He had withdrawn from the INF treaty, and he gave Ukraine offensive weapons in the form of $400 million worth of dual-purpose offensive weapons for the first time, and they still led with this narrative and captivated a lot of people with it.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Which is equally wild.
You made another point I wanted to address. These January 6 people, let's say that some of them did do whatever, broke the window or went into the building unauthorized. Okay, then that's deserving of a smack on the hand and a strongly worded letter and maybe a $1,000 fine. Don't do that again.
Well, even that to me represents a perversion of the original republic, where if you're going to call this the people's house, the people have the right to be in that house or protest around those grounds, especially when Capitol Hill police are letting them in. But yeah, he's making a good point. I mean, that's not an insurrection. These people weren't armed, but that's what they went with. That's what they said, that this was an attempt to throw a coup over the federal government, despite the fact that Trump said, don't be violent. It's just so absurd. And I have many reasons to dislike Trump. Can't stand Trump. You guys know that. But this one was absurd.
30 years in prison? Again, is society really better off by locking all these people up and spending millions and millions of dollars of the taxpayers' money to do it? Of course not.
No, of course not. But it also just divides us even further.
It does.
And it also very much distorted the narrative with people like Jim Gaffigan, who's a friend of mine, who's a very left-leaning comedian. Mm-hmm. And he had it in his mind that these people went in, and they also have this thing where they say a cop was murdered.
Right.
That's not true.
I hate that.
They say it over and over again. That's not true. One cop died after the fact of a heart attack. Mm-hmm. You could say maybe it was because of the stress of January 6th, perhaps.
Maybe. Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Maybe.
Yeah, and that's the murder narrative that they led with. Instead of, hey, the only person that actually was murdered that day was a protester, Ashley Babbitt, rest in peace, by the way, murdered by Capitol Hill police. But this was somehow still an insurrection, an unarmed insurrection in which no member of the federal government was killed by the protesters. It's absolutely absurd. They ran wild with this. You had AOC saying that, she feared for her life. They got into Pelosi's office, and this is, violating the statist and regime stooges kind of sacred pulpit. They view the Capitol as some kind of religious institution that it should not be viewed as, especially in today's day and age where the government is so completely corrupt. They viewed this as violative of, the most sacred sacrament of their civil religion. The U.S. Capitol, it's just so absurd.
He shouldn't have been a cop.
Yeah. I mean, if you can
he had such
die of
significant health problems.
Right. Like, that's not normal to just die of a heart attack because of a very stressful day.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it. This idea that they killed cops, that narrative keeps coming out. It was an insurrection. They murdered cops. They broke into the White House. They were looking for Nancy Pelosi. They were going to kill her. Like, okay, are you sure? Because there's a lot of this story that's bullshit. Now it turns out, at one point in time, they were saying it was 20 FBI agents. Now the latest number is 270.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's huge.
That's a lot of people. It's a lot of people that are encouraging people to break in. Mm-hmm. And there's many instances of these suspected people that are on camera. A lot of them wearing face masks. Mm-hmm. There's one of them where a guy's removing the broken glass from the window and encouraging people to go in. And another guy gets in his face and goes, "Do not do that." And then he pushes that guy, "Fuck you." And the other guy backs off. How is that not being investigated as a serious crime?
Because the FBI isn't going to investigate itself. The FBI is the problem. That's the nature of the deep state. They get away with all sorts of crimes that regular people could not get away with. They cover for their own, and they always make excuses. This goes far deeper than Ray Epps. As he said, there was something like 270 known FBI assets in the crowd that day. Yeah, it might not be all of them saying, go into the Capitol, but that's what Ray Epps said. That's what Nick Fuentes said from a megaphone on the side. I don't know, I don't have the proof in front of me that these were FBI informants, but both of those men had a bullhorn, said to do things like that, and then they themselves did not do that thing that they called for others to do. But it goes far beyond that. It is entrenched in the FBI system for these assets to entrap people in schemes that they wouldn't engage in without that agitation by these deep state actors that just get away with it. They're criminals of the highest degree, and the criminals aren't going to investigate the criminals. And whenever they pretend to investigate the criminals, it's the government investigating the government and determining that the government did nothing wrong.
And like that is a serious, it's a violation of what you're supposed to be doing in the first place. If the FBI was on that lawn, I would hope what they would be doing is informing people entering into this building is a felony. Mm-hmm. Breaking these windows, getting into this building is, you do not want to do this. If you want to peacefully protest, do that. But I'm telling you, this will fuck with you for the rest of your life and most likely ruin it.
Yeah, I'm with Joe. I wish that was the case too, but that's a very idealistic, blue-pilled way to look at the world, the hypothetical environment in which the FBI would actually do that. Yeah, if we lived in a just society, I would like that, but that's utterly delusional if people think that that is actually what the FBI is going to be. Even if you reform it, the FBI doesn't exist to protect us. The FBI exists to destroy the lives of dissidents, kill the innocents. That's what Ruby Ridge and Waco prove. That's what the murder of Fred Hampton prove. The wiretapping under COINTELPRO of people like Stokely Carmichael and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, that's what that proved. And this is no different. The FBI is villainous. It deserves to be abolished completely. No ifs, ands, or buts. No reform.
I think you're 100% right.
That's what I would hope from law enforcement. I wouldn't hope that they would be trying to set people up.
And from a civil society.
Right.
You know, do we want to set people up to go to prison? We want to wreck families and wreck people's lives? Why would we want to do that?
Also, did they turn down the idea of bringing in the National Guard?
You know, I really don't understand. It appears, yes. It appears that that's exactly what happened.
Also significantly deterred people from committing these crimes.
That's right.
That they were encouraged to do.
I'll tell you, if I was at a demonstration and all of a sudden the National Guard showed up, I'd say, this isn't for me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think most people would do that as well.
Agreed, but to be truthful here, the government ran with the narrative that they didn't turn off the idea of the National Guard coming in. They said it was just completely delayed, which that doesn't withstand scrutiny in some stretches, that the National Guard couldn't have been mobilized. But that is the narrative that they went with, that they didn't turn down the presence of the National Guard. They were just too delayed to make a serious presence known on January 6th.
Right.
It's crazy. It's just so gross that our legal system gets used against political opponents in that way, in such a devious and just a sinister way.
Harry Truman once famously said, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog.
Yeah. God, what a gross business.
Yeah, and it's been going on a long time, since the inception of the FBI. The FBI, established by its chief architect. I mean, the Bureau of Investigation had existed beforehand, but J. Edgar Hoover was big on warrantless wiretapping and extracting blackmail from people in power such that they wouldn't do anything about his power. That's what COINTELPRO was. It was an attempt to undermine the lives of dissidents in America, especially during the civil rights era. A lot of the black nationalists, a lot of the black civil rights attorneys and civil rights activists had their rights completely perverted by this sinister regime for doing things that weren't illegal and doing things to them that, again, would be illegal if it was me or you doing that. The government has a different standard than you and me, which throws a lot of kind of refutation against this idea that the government's just a reflection of us, that the government exists based on the consent of the governed. No one in the governed agreed that they should have that power, and that's a power that the public couldn't delegate to them because we ourselves don't have the power to destroy innocent lives like that, to rummage through the personal conversations and effects of others, and to, in Martin Luther King's case, try to convince him to commit suicide, by the way. Deputy Director of the FBI, William Sullivan, drafted a memo trying to convince him to do that. Many people still don't know that, but that letter was divulged. It's been declassified, and you can see that now.
It's just sad because I also am a patriot, and I want to think of us as better than that.
Yeah, we're the good guys.
And I don't think it's necessarily the fault of these individuals. I think the system really sucks. And I think you work for that system, and just like all these Congress people that wind up insider trading, everybody else is doing it. It's the culture. You get wrapped up in it, just like bad cops. You get assigned to a precinct that's filled with corrupt cops, and you have to do things to stay with them. They're your blood brothers, and you're all in this together. And so you wind up doing some criminal activities that you think are just everybody does it. This is what we do.
Yep.
And you're an FBI agent. Well, we got to set this guy up. Okay, let's set him up. This is what we do. Hey, if he doesn't do it, he's not committing a crime. We got nothing on him. Okay. And then you just convince him to do it, and he's a fucking idiot. And so he does it, and he hits that cell phone, and now you're arresting him. And he's like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, as far as where the culpability lies, it is a systematic issue, no doubt. This is a perverted, toxic political apparatus under which we live. But also, if you're taking away the culpability of individuals knowing that this is what they do, I think that's not appropriating the responsibility correctly completely either. Because that's the SS defense. We are just following orders. And that's not to say people's, earnest feelings about what they're getting into aren't perverted by the system itself. But at the point you realize that, it behooves you to resign. Same thing with the military. Even if it's a dishonorable discharge that would ruin, your ability to hold rights in some regards, that probably is more moral to take accountability for that, to go against the perverted war machine, than to suffer, having to kill other people in the name of the state, in the name of Israel, in the name of Ukraine, or whatever proxy war or regime change war the U.S. happens to be dealing with at that time.
And he's so dumb, he barely knows what happened.
Mm-hmm. And the chances are he can't afford a decent attorney,
right,
or he's not notorious enough and newsworthy enough to get, A-list attorneys volunteering pro bono.
Right.
So he's stuck with a public defender that's going to spend 8 hours on the case, and he's going to get screwed in the end.
And there's also the narrative that's very difficult to shake. So if you get accused of some sort of a heinous crime, the narrative for most people that are casual viewers of that story is that you're a terrorist.
Yeah.
Or you're a guy who's going to kidnap the governor. Or you're a guy who is an insurrectionist who's trying to overthrow the government on January 6th. And then you watch the footage that they wouldn't release during the trials, and you see them getting a guided tour. The guided tour through like the security guards are walking them into the Senate. Like, what the fuck? What is this? Like, what is, and why is no one outraged? And why is it only one side that's outraged? God, if I was a Democrat congressman or a senator, or if I was any sort of a politician on the other side, I'd be like, do you know how disgusting this is? This is, you're using this to go after Donald Trump?
Of all things.
Instead of just better political opposition?
Exactly.
Yeah, they don't want that. They want supreme power and coercion. And yeah, Tucker Carlson was heroic for releasing that footage of January 6th. The regime did not want them releasing that footage, showing the guided tour, showing people peacefully walking, through filed lines and orderly lines through the Capitol on that day, being led in there by Capitol Hill police. And look, I don't think a lot of Americans know this because of how we've been, groomed, how we've been raised, what we've been taught, the propaganda that comes through us, as we go into government schools. But, people could go into the White House. People could approach the White House. People could ring the White House door, as late as the Harding presidency. I think a lot of that changed during the Wilson presidency, but this was really, the people's, not Congress, but the White House. But the same was true of Congress. Congress wasn't just this lockdown imperial, sanctum, this lockdown imperial bastion of power in which it was locked down by the national security regime, not until much, much later. Same thing with the White House. So if you're going to say, again, this is the people's house, the people have a right to it, and they weren't exactly armed, they weren't dangerous. It turns out the Capitol Hill police were more dangerous. But this isn't the only entrapment the FBI engages in. There's been many more things. Here's one example, the Whitmer entrapment plot. If you remember this from 2020, the Fed said, hey, eventually I think they charged something like 9 people were involved in this plot to surveil and then kidnap the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. She still is today. And defense attorneys said, hey, this was FBI asset-based coercion where these guys were entrapped because they might have had, some animosities toward her for other issues, and then they were goaded along by federal agents to get involved with this. Now, in this case, some of them were convicted and some of them were acquitted. In another case, in 2012, we had this Cleveland bridge, the 82 bridge incident, if many people remember this one. This is where there were some guys basically drinking in a bar, essentially drunk. And those guys were entrapped too. There happened to be an FBI agent or an asset, one of the two, on the scene, goading them into giving them explosives to blow up this bridge, saying, hey, you guys should blow up this bridge. And they're like, yeah, I guess so. And they bought some explosives that weren't even remotely enough to actually blow up that bridge. So this is not a new issue. This has been happening a long time. It's been happening recently. In these 3 cases, we know that's true. And FBI entrapment is just another reason why the FBI must be eliminated, not be reformed, not be cut down to size by firing something like 200 people. And this Trump drain the swamp mentality should actually be applied to the FBI, not just be rhetoric that was used as an electoral vehicle. Because if you remember, Kash Patel said, hey, my goal is to shut down the Hoover building and then replace it with a museum to the deep state. Well, guess what happened? That didn't happen. That's what I can say. But FBI entrapment's a serious issue. This was one of the most loony narratives that the feds sold, and sold largely successfully for a few years, that this unarmed protest, in which there were some riots, there were some breaking of windows and things like that, a lot of it antagonized by the federal assets there, led on by Capitol Hill police, but was not an insurrection, was unarmed, had no wherewithal to overthrow the federal government, and no wherewithal to change what congressional votes would be that day. It's just so stupid. The whole thing was a Looney Tunes narrative, and of course that's what CNN and MSNBC carried for several years. Thankfully, many Americans know better now. Some people still claim that that was an insurrection, but I think you should look at them as if they're saying, hey, you guys saw what you saw, you can say what you want, but, Chris Christie is actually an aerobic, super athlete. He's not fat like you say. He's not fat like you see. He's actually a super athlete, and you guys need to acknowledge that. But that's where we're at. But I do want to hear from you. Do you agree with John Kiriakou or Joe Rogan about this, the FBI entrapment? What's the truth about January 6th? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Joe Rogan. Excellent interview. John Kiriakou is a hero. He is a CIA whistleblower that blew the whistle on U.S. torture against, suspected terrorists, and served time in jail for that. Total hero, deserves a complete pardon, will never get one, but should get one because he exposed crimes that even the U.S. Constitution prohibits. No torture. You can't do that under the U.S. Constitution. But let me know what you think. If you like this video and other videos like it that I do, please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. You can help support this channel, and if you do that, I will thank you profusely. And in return for that good deed on your side, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.